Welcome, Ben.
Hey,
Great to have you here. And we're gonna explore today something I've been deep into the last few weeks, leading a course on how we can integrate knowledge around developmental trauma into a practice of presence that we both lead on transformational connection. And this has been quite a big topic over the years, like how a practice where we are exploring in a meditative awareness or an embodied kind of exploration, what what could be defined as trauma or how people are impacted by yeah, events in their life that are still maybe unresolved or not fully integrated, and how we navigate that. Yeah, what comes up for you just hearing that straight away, and yeah, how is it to be here right now?
yeah, like I notice like I immediately go to just starting to remember like all the different ways in which like I've been meeting various people over the years and how I've been showing up, how they've been showing up. And just yeah, the kind of the complexity and the intricacy around yeah, the way we kind of experience and make meaning and then yeah, seeing ways in which we could start to apply the term like trauma or like see the impacts of how we've grown up and developed and how that really kind of shapes and guides the way we kind of identify but also relate.
Yeah, well, I think there's something I've noticed with all the kind of like senior kind of leadership team with this whole kind of realm of or understanding of developmental trauma. There's almost like a wince at the name that I can sometimes feel myself, but I can see in others of like uncomfort. There's something uncomfortable about the framing.
Mm.
I wonder if you get that experience as well.
Yeah, like I think I mentioned like off the call how the phrase in me like initially doesn't seem to go in. Like it seems very distant in some ways. It's hard for me to almost relate to it. Something about like the way in which I maybe relate to the idea of trauma is interesting, or the fact that it would in some way there would be like a healing way of relating to it. I can kind of make sense of it, but in some ways it doesn't seem like a natural way of seeing the world.
Mm. Yeah, I think the wince for me is just having seen a lot of these kind of conferences of trauma summits and um, some of the more therapeutic ways of talking about our experience doesn't always fully resonate for what I feel is like at the heart of transformational connection. It's almost like there's something wrong that we need to know how to work with or manage or heal. And and so there's some discomfort at that frame. And at the same time, I've actually more often than not been humbled when I really go and practice or train or learn from someone who's been deeply immersed in this kind of field, just how much they can show me about my experience, um, and help me see other people more clearly.
Yeah, I can hear a little bit of like flickering across my awareness as you speak of ways in which I could see trauma and the frame and perception of trauma as almost being like my life is about the trauma in some way. And there's also another frame which is like this trauma is a like a memory or like a mark of something that happened and like it's important that that happened, it had an impact, and life is still moving on and is still growing with this. And it's like yeah, I yeah, I think something about honoring the power of life and the holding that it has for spaces of trauma, and like just letting that, yeah, kind of do its work in some way.
So it sounds like for you, you're, is it wary of a kind of becoming overly focused on, yeah, your life being about like difficult events that happened in your early life, or yeah, big impactful thing, and then yeah, how that then has you relate to your experiences.
Like it seems true that there's impact, and it also seems true in which the way in which we orient to that changes a lot. Like if we orient to trauma as something that was done to us, then we are cast in a way that can prevent an integration because we're separated from ourselves in that being done to, and there's a way in which things were done to us. So it's something like, yeah, I can feel ways in which the holding of trauma can impact the way in which we can relate to it. And it seems, yeah, quite powerful and quite important how that can vary.
Right. I start to feel like it's some kind of wanting some kind of orientation, or um like we've kind of dived right into the complexity of the frame almost. Or I think why I started to well, I did training in NAM, which is a quite a presence-based approach to, yeah, integrating developmental trauma. And I learned so much in that training. It helped me so much to be able to practice with more clarity and embodiment in, yeah, in our practices. And then I was thinking for a while of some way to share like what I learned there. But it's been about 4 or 5 years, I think, since then, or 3 or 4 years since I did it. And um, because of this very thing we've started exploring, I've been kind of reluctant to kind of put myself out there as a kind of developmental trauma specialist or something. But the truth is that frame helps me so much in the practice, and it helps me with my own kind of developmental journey. But it also feels like needs nuance, I think, and inquiry. And just to, for anyone that kind of doesn't know so much about the territory, my understanding of developmental trauma, or trauma first, is like a very impactful event that causes some kind of harm that hasn't been fully metabolized. Or if we're still talking about it, it's like this event somehow is still present. And then developmental trauma is actually more like a sustained, it's not so much like an accident or like an abuse that's like a one-off event. It's more like a continual sense of something not being quite right for us in our, especially with our primary caregivers. So something's not quite right and it leaves an imprint. Like we have this kind of way of relating to ourselves and to others that's kind of been shaped by this early experience. And so the wisdom of this kind of seeing or frame is that, oh, there are things I'm doing in my life now that isn't necessarily my most authentic expression. It's something I learned. And if I can see like these patterns or ways of like I've learned to survive as they're happening, there's a chance of a transformation. Something new can be possible. Yeah. Does that make sense to you hearing
Yeah,
that?
it does.
And I suppose what I was interested with you, because I actually we've led together a few times recently, And what I feel with you is it seems like, I don't think you've done a training like that, but it seems like you intuitively have a sensitivity to the same things that I've learned through that kind of training that I was already interested in. But it seems like you navigate that kind of territory in your practice. And that's why I wanted to speak to you about it, how you experience it.
Yeah, it seems true. Like a lot of the time I find myself like connecting with places where I've like learned stuff about my experience or encountered stuff or like found ways in which energy moves or gets stuck. And but like there seems to be a lot of wisdom in that in some way. Like yeah, I get a lot out of just being in spaces of practice, but also like just in my own self-awareness. It's like it feels like there's a lot to learn about the way in which sort of these kind of patterns or movements or behaviors, there's a kind of a logic or a wisdom or elegance or beauty to them. And a bit like, yeah, I guess if you're learning to ride a bike or learning how to surf or something, I think there's a way in which after a while of just being in that kind of space, you start to attune to these movements. And there seems to be a lot of like wisdom and power and potential and just like yeah, almost learning that or being with it.
Yeah. So it seems like you feel like an intuitive and like a resonance with this idea that there are ways we've learned to respond to things. And if we can see the subtle ways that we're kind of automatically responding, there's an opportunity maybe to bring more awareness or create something different maybe, or allow for some kind of integration maybe.
Yeah, it's like a lot of the time in practice we're exploring, you know, being with others in their world, and there's already so much richness and like variation and like just learning how other people make meaning and their ways of relating. And then in kind of developmental trauma, it's almost like you can start to see that in comparison, like, oh, it seems very interesting that in your way of relating or in your way of meaning, it's very much like this, or like it seems like very heavy, close to the ground, or it seems to avoid this place. It's like it's almost like by comparison, like, oh, it's very interesting. It's very much like this. And then it's like suddenly you're kind of interacting with them in a way that starts to bring awareness to that. It's like even that in itself starts to maybe raise questions, which can be very interesting. Like, you know, places in the body awareness that were previously kind of overlooked can start to just almost like just by the question, do you feel something in this place? And then they think about it and they go, oh, I never thought of that. And then something like a weird sensation, like I get this tingling, or it's like something starts to wake up again. So like, yeah, neuroplasticity, the capacity of, yeah, our brains to like change and modify and adapt. And then almost like by comparison, like, and we see the diversity that's available. It's almost like, yeah, we can say, oh yeah, I notice you do it like this, or like I do it like this, and just sharing that in that kind of meeting just seems to create possibility or potential.
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of curiosity we're bringing in transformational connection, like the just noticing what's happening is already like helping us wake up to how we normally do things. Because it's amazing actually for me how little I know about my experience actually. So like if you catch me midway through saying something and you're like, oh, what's happening there? It's like it kind of wakes me up to, oh yeah, my voice just lowered down, or I got faster, um or I've suddenly started swearing more, or something, like something's just shifted. And I think, yeah, what I hear you say is if you can catch that, but not just like call it out, but like with curiosity and yeah, genuine like presence, like, oh, I'm noticing this thing, like there's a chance for something, yeah, something to happen there.
Yeah, the embodiment seems really important. Like, I mean, for example, if someone is seems incredibly attuned to something about their environment that makes them safe or unsafe, and if they're reading something which makes them feel strongly unsafe, I can imagine like parts of their experience shutting down in some kind of protection. Like if they're having that all the time, then a lot of their experience is almost like just constantly dormant. And if you were present in a way that embodied something like a trusting or an acceptance that met the thing that was reading the lack of trust or acceptance as unsafety, that would relax that like process or something, and suddenly they can be more there. So yeah, the actual act of almost like no, it's almost like we're acknowledging that there's this complex game that our bodies and minds are playing, and we can like play that game or dance that game like better in some way. It's not just about like say saying about it or naming a thing. Sometimes that's enough, but the actual feeling and embodying of it seems incredibly powerful and relevant.
Yeah, well, there seems this alchemical process, or I mean that term can be a bit new agey, but it's like catching ourselves in in some kind of way of being. So like suddenly feeling unsafe and being able to in that moment just be like, whoa, like what's actually happening? That kind of that process of kind of decoupling almost, or like being able to just bring an awareness to it rather than following that kind of, you know, it just being true that it's unsafe and then acting from there and like going along that usual pattern to being like, hang on a second, what actually is making me feel unsafe right now? Oh, I'm imagining you're telling me I'm wrong and that I don't belong here. And then I can actually check with you, like, is that what you meant? And then suddenly there's like a whole new possibility. And it sounds so simple now when we say it, like, oh yeah, I'm starting to feel unsafe. Just be aware of it and then check in with someone whether it's true, like that something unsafe is happening. But but when you do this in real time, it has such a big impact. Like even just stopping to be present, it's like suddenly I can feel all this energy and embodiment, and then actually turning to you in the present moment and being like, what did you actually mean? Can be quite vulnerable because it might be true that you think I'm doing something wrong, or you don't think I really belong, like, or you don't really want to be close with me, or and so to actually genuinely find out the thing that I'm afraid of, that's like that often creates such a lot of emotion and presence and awareness. And there can be quite a lot of resistance to doing these kind of moves, I find.
I'm also noticing a way in which presence allows us to actually be, yeah, more receptive to the fullness of the current moment. And like, I mean, in this moment, for example, there's the context that we're on a podcast, and I can already feel ways in which my behavior is being slightly modulated, and I'm experiencing a similar sort of almost modulation happening in your behavior, and I'm attributing it to that. So it's like I'm not, yeah, fully being what I would normally be, and I'm aware of this impact, and it's like it's quite
Yeah.
a funny feeling to have this sort of like almost two-tone experience,
Mm.
and it seems real, like it's part of this current context. I think
Yeah.
sometimes when we're having interactions, there's stuff happening that seems outside awareness, like or if someone's, for example, like in a nightclub and they're getting slightly drunk, their behavior starts to change and stuff like comes into awareness and goes out of awareness. And having been like someone who doesn't, yeah, I'm just teetotal. I often notice this kind of behavioral change in people I'm with, which I've always found slightly strange, a little bit unsettling for me.
Yeah, well, it's good you bring awareness to it now, like how this context is impacting us and our interaction. And I wonder what that's like to notice it. And uh,
It's often slightly as I name it, which is nice.
mm,
And I think I feel something like of it's almost like a presence. Like if people were to watch this, I imagine being watched. So it's like I imagine a sense of attention, and then it's like how that sense that someone might be watching or witnessing this, like it does, yeah, it impacts my system. Like I feel something like a faint, something like maybe fear is quite soft. Um, but also it's like quite nice. It's like there's someone else here as well with us. It's not just two of us. It's like there's another person or more than that. I can feel that almost like it's calming me as well.
yeah, yeah. What I notice in me is there's a looseness that I could imagine I would feel if, like, me and you were just talking. There wasn't a kind of recording, a potential audience. But there's something about that freedom that also sometimes it's like it's nice to feel like I'm being myself, but there's a way that can also be actually like what we were discussing before, where you just kind of you can just be following a kind of pattern. Whereas in it's slightly uncomfortable maybe, or to notice this kind of wanting to do it well, or be, this sense of responding to being watched, but it also helps me to be present and mindful, which I like.
I'm noticing my neck tension, thinking about slightly restricted body movements.
Yeah, there's some tension in my spine as well, actually.
And sadness.
I think there's something about this topic that does have me a little uneasy. It's like on the one side, I have a lot of interactions with people that feel such a relief knowing that there's some awareness of this and some way to try to understand, yeah, some of the difficult, yeah, patterns or feelings they can experience. And, and then there are other people I interact with that have a big suspicion of this frame, and don't like the way it can have this connotation of being wounded or needing to be fixed, or there being people you can trust with your experience because they're experts, and like it can be a big distrust of that. And I find there's there's like truth on both sides, and a little uneasy to navigate sometimes. I wasn't expecting a silence to come in.
It feels like a deep one for me.
Mm. Yeah. In the silence, the truth of me actually seems like there are important things about this this particular frame that I like to explore and like to share and want to speak about.
Yeah, I think in me the silence is something about like I feel like a sadness of almost like I feel a bit more connected to a place of like just grief, something around, places of life being hard or trying to survive and the challenges around that or something. Maybe it being seen or how it's held. It feels quite nice, like it's sad, but like acknowledging.
That seems to touch one of the potentials of like, like I noticed that like when things get kind of intense in my life, like recently there's been a big agreement I need to make that's going to have quite a big impact on on things in my life. And so under that kind of from the perception of this being a very important thing and some of the intensive conversations that I've had around it, it's easy to start to feel things like chaotic or life's too hard, or I notice these kind of subtle like, oh, this is so difficult, like self-judgments around my kind of limitations or things I may have done that seemed unconscious. But there's one way I hold that now where it's like this isn't actually necessarily information about what's happening now, but what's happening now is giving me the opportunity to be to be with parts of myself that I don't normally access. So a part of me that felt very hopeless and like there was no way out at some point in my life, and now being able to experience it more than let that kind of let me get like stay in a kind of panic mode or something. I'm curious about your silence again.
Yeah, it feels like, yeah, and acknowledging. Yeah, I just have this, it's weird. It's like an image of like being in a place which is like a lot of corridors, and along this corridors there's a lot of children, and they're all looking at me. Just like feels very, very big. Something about like the pressure or the presence of that yearning or
It's like an image or
yeah, like it's something about like the sense of like a flavor of sadness, a flavor of something like timeless, like memory. And then something about like the intensity of it, like there's something like a need or a yearning. And it's like the image of this being watched by a lot of like there's a waiting or a weight of waiting or a weight of yearning or something. But it's quite quiet. It's like something about forgetting.
yeah. I get
Yeah.
very curious about images. I've got a friend who's very trained in internal family systems, so he does a lot of parts work, and we had a little adventure recently, did a kind of 4 or 5 deep explorations, and one thing I saw in that approach is that as I start to explore these subtle parts of myself, images come up. And at first they might seem abstract or like they don't like, is this just my mind? Kind of. daydreaming, but it's like, yeah, but if my mind's daydreaming, maybe there's something to it. And actually, images seem to carry like some kind of signature sometimes of experiences that are still metabolizing. Or so when I think of, well, when I relate to you having this image of you're walking through a corridor and there's like children that
Like
like
I'm stationary and then a lot of people are witnessing me
mm,
some way or watching, but it's not a passive. It's like, yeah, the image seems to almost like try to wrap itself around the felt sense. Visual poetry.
reminded me a bit like the what you were saying about the context of the podcast being watched.
Yeah, a little bit. That feels slightly different though.
It reminds me of the Matrix, where especially the second and third one, where there's the kind of if the Matrix is the symbol of the mind, there's those rooms that are kind of where there's lots of doors and you can kind of enter lots of different parts of the Matrix from these kind of hallways.
Yeah, the image stuff happens, I think, a fair bit for me in circling. So it seems like a quite a natural part of it.
Yeah, again, I know Wilbur talks about symbols being one way to access kind of depth. So our experience isn't immediately available to us. Like we can't just be like, yeah, what are the kind of deeper existential like fears you have, or what are the kind of emotions that are kind of most primary to you. You can't just like click our fingers and access that. We often have to discover it in presence, or
Mm.
this is what all these modalities are for. They're all good at, I think, at getting to certain levels of depth. They all have a kind of certain thing they're good at kind of going towards.
Mm.
Seems like you get a lot of these kind of symbols, images come up when you're practicing. There's maybe doorways to different kind of levels of depth, or
Yeah, I remember getting them when I like did my first ever weekend. They were quite vivid. But like I'm pretty sure it's something like there's a sense of something like an aliveness. It just seems to like come out in the visual for me. They often like without necessarily understanding the image, like I trust that the image is there's something in the felt experience which it relates to. And that's yeah, usually quite a powerful guide. It's almost like yeah, if there's a lot of meaning happening like outside of conscious awareness, then like it creeps in lots of ways. I think if we open ourselves to like the ways in which this can come in, it's like it just starts to come in.
mm, yeah, sounds like a bit like when you take psychedelics, even though I haven't done that much, but it's like a that kind of forces the issue of like bringing in
Yeah,
aspects of your
I think
experience
so.
are very subtle and changes your perception for a while it's
Mm,
working.
mm.
But it seems like there's a way we can do this actually by being in connection. If you start to be aware of the subtle kind of symbols, images, feelings, sensations, you start accessing these almost psychedelic like experiences or bits of information.
Yeah, like one thing that stood out to me quite early when I started doing the practice was like it's again, it's related to like the neuroplasticity. There's a way in which like if we invite the parts of our experience that we aren't aware of, they start to show up more. And if we ignore the parts of our experience that we're not aware of, then they don't. And it's yeah, it's almost like the example I sometimes use is like if you imagine a box in your mind and then you open the box and look inside, what's inside it? It's like so I've met something in my subconscious is then given space to be in that box. And
Mm.
like I wouldn't have known before I did that what it was in it. I couldn't have necessarily predicted very easily. And it's like become this like doorway or this like portal to access or give space for something. And then so much of my experience has been like that. Like yeah, if I do make space for things, if I actually invite them in and say there may be more here, what's happening here? Is there more? Just asking these powerful questions is enough to sort of legitimize that there is space for these voices to emerge.
Mm.
If you don't believe that they exist, then they often have learned to keep quiet. Something that's true about that too.
Right. Get more in touch with my heart and remembering, because me and you knew each other before even there was anything. Well, maybe it was I got in contact with you when we were first creating the website, but I think I knew you before that, didn't I? Or
Don't remember. I think that was the first time.
that was so yeah. So the first time
Yeah.
we met, I was wanting support with our first ever website, which
Mm,
you
mm,
helped us with,
mm,
and I suppose I think I knew of you because you were working with my brother, and
mm.
so there was a kind of intimacy I felt with you. If you were working with my brother, uh, and then when you were, I don't know how it started. We were talking about websites at one point, and somehow we got talking about the practice, I think, or I don't know how it happened, but then you started coming to a weekend, and it was so you were so different when I first saw you in the practice to what I was
Mm.
experiencing when we were talking about the website.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember like needing to know enough about the practice to be able to sort of make a website that advertised it. That was my initial reason to come, but then coming to the practice session and yeah, I think one of the most powerful things for me was there it being a place that legitimized parts of my experiences that previously had no seemingly had no purpose or voice.
Mm.
Like nobody seems to have time or interest in discussing the textures or qualities of experience or and it's like, my awareness just shuts those down. It's like these are irrelevant. Nobody seems to care about them. And if I would pay attention, it doesn't seem to be useful. And then you come to a context where, oh yeah, how does that feel? Does it have a kind of a scratchy quality? How does this like energy in your chest, how does it move? Does it have a color? Like suddenly it's like that is part of an inquiry and then legitimizing that, it seems to gain volume and gains becomes more real in my awareness. And that yeah, that was like one of the most powerful gifts of the practice for me, just starting that journey of legitimizing of my experience.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if you remember, because I mean, you're working with my brother, and my brother's very business oriented, and I imagine you're doing a lot of technical stuff. And then was it, did you notice a difference in the beginning to the way I was working with you, and what made what was it about the practice that started to make you curious
Curious about the
going to
practice.
the weekend? Yeah. Right.
Not really knowing anything about it beforehand. That's why I was drawn in and said like I wanted to like learn enough to advertise. It felt quite um, yeah, utility choice really. But then having gone to it, it was like there was clear there was something very alive in it for me personally, and then just kept coming. Like I learned so much, like almost like game-changing things in the first weekend. Um, and that, yeah, I think I ran for just a long way with that, and just the richness of the opportunity to explore in the practice containers.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember for me because I was so drawn to the kind of the mystical or the late, yeah, states of consciousness, but I was also actually I had a particularly uh, turbulent early life, and there were symptoms that were challenging for me that seem related. So I've gone very deep also on the, yeah, developmental explorations. I like to call it more like the downward path, like it's going down into the body and down into the like the gristle and yeah, transformation coming from the ground up. And,
Yeah.
and there was something about being able to, yeah, explore both. It's kind of more mystical or psychedelic like experiences, but then also being able to kind of see where there might be rage or fear or unsafety that's kind of slightly unconscious, and just being able to do that in a flow, like as it arose. That was something that was very important for me in the beginning. Well, has been all the way through. And I think the thing that being with you definitely seems like this more symbolic um, imagery parts. Like you seem to have quite a, I don't know, receptiveness to that, those kind of subtle, you've done a lot of exploration of Kabbalah, and is that how the way you experience it, that you have a particular sensitivity for that, or
Yeah, I think everything I've looked at has always felt like it's expanding something, some kind of awareness or capacity. I think like at the start, there was always already in me a kind of a really strong sense of like trusting the imminent, like trusting in like the potential for magic or something. Like it felt very easy for me to say, I don't understand everything that's happening here. I'm open to there being things moving like out of our awareness because I can feel them. Like there's some kind of urgency or tension. There's definitely something moving. And yeah, trusting like, oh, it seems to have an intelligence or a way of like being, and just getting very curious about that. It's like, yeah, wondering. Yeah, just I think just being open to that being present and not necessarily being scared or like wary, but like also curious seems to make it a lot easier to access these places and
mm.
be in them and to like feel them. A lot of the frames and stuff that have come along the line, like they've often been quite insightful and they sort of enrich my sense of it. But like it's something about that core of trusting and curiosity has just seemingly been very powerful for me in my practice.
I think what happens in me being with you is I imagine there might be people who aren't as receptive to symbols or and I think there is a way we can actually enhance our receptivity if we want to, or at least have some kind of curiosity about others who seem to be more kind of sensitive to that. Because I think it's like, I think that's why we like fantasy movies and sci-fi, and especially fantasy, because it's like, in one sense, like, why are we watching this boy who's a wizard, which just doesn't exist, and he's running around with trees that can talk, and it's like he's got an owl that sends messages, and yeah, his uncle's a werewolf or something. Like, but actually, those symbols, while we're watching, actually help us to access feelings. Like it just, if from a more kind of just straightforward explanation for me, it's just like if I see a werewolf, it's not real, but the in the sense of normal real, but the it can help me access a kind of primal fear and primal aggression that's not normal for me to access. And so if I allow that image to, if I can suspend my normal kind of rational wanting everything to be concrete and allow myself to experience that, then I'm getting access to a more range of feeling. But there's something about like if I open to, like, say this image of a werewolf, or there's this part I think in Harry Potter. I don't know why I'm thinking of Harry Potter right now, but he's got this kind of jewel that can awaken some kind of image of people who have died, and he can kind of interact with people who have died. It's like in like invoking that image, if I can be present to it, for me, it's a little bit like what psychedelics do. Because psychedelics open us to a kind of resonance, or like they maybe inhibit, certain parts of us and open different parts of us. So we start to perceive and feel things differently. And that's actually what symbols can do. I think if we explore them, is they open up and maybe shut off other parts so we can experience a different kind of quality of reality. And then that can be very rich. Does that resonate with you as a like way to understand it?
Yeah, a lot does there. Like the like most of my interest in like um more magical frames, magical paradigms. Like there's a theme running through of almost like magic as a study of like communicating across paradigms or accessing wisdom or an intelligence that's almost like have language, the use of language, the use of symbols seems to be just a very powerful part of that. And yeah, I find that the symbols just often just seem to be very, very powerful, but how we relate to them, how we understand them, how they can change. And then, yeah, when you start to talk about either communicating with others, being with others in their world, or even being with yourself, like conscious, subconscious, or yeah, it's like there is this like beautiful exploration of that process. And yeah, like there's just a lot there, and it seems true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's like what you described of coming into a space where, oh, like my interest in this, or my desire to explore this is welcomed, or there's an encouragement to bring, and some people don't explore that when they come into the practice, but uh, but that's certainly like something you are always like kind of bringing in when you were in the practice. I can remember, and the subtlety and complexity of what you can bring in that realm. Yeah, definitely has a lot of impact when you're in the group. And I wonder if part of what it was like refreshing is like when I think I've got quite a lot of friends and acquaintances who are very scientific, and actually they probably aren't listening anymore, to our conversation. Maybe they are, but like as soon as it starts to feel magical thinking, it's like, it's totally like that can't be proven or it's just imagination and in some ways understandably so because it is easy to get lost or imagine things that, in a way that's kind of escapist or um,
Mhm.
isn't really connected to when you actually discover what's really going on. But then on the other side, there's such a tradition and a depth of humans, exploring the mystical, the unknown, or the inner experience, the inner world. These great kind of, from Plato to Jung to like all these great figures from history. Like, surely there's got to be something to that. And it reminds me a bit of, I don't know, there's that really famous scientist, I can't remember, he did a series on the cosmos and is it Neil Di can't remember his name. He's still around and he was talking about Isaac Newton and and his kind of concluding remarks were like one of the best scientists, geniuses of all time. And he discovered so much and he progressed. And he also did this thing called alchemy, but that all came to nothing. And I was like, well, I don't know. Like, it might be what he was practicing there, which it was definitely a hidden for it wasn't really a science, it was more a mystical practice in my understanding. It was a hidden way for people to do mystical practice because it was so dangerous to to do anything out of the orthodox religious paradigm. So they pretended to be doing kind of making lead into gold, but it was a symbol actually of transformation and going into these symbolic realms. Um, and I wonder how much of Isaac Newton's creativity was his propensity or capacity there that enabled him to come up with, world-changing ideas.
Yeah, like I consider myself in my my more magical kind of interest to be fairly scientific. Um, and like I see psychology and semiotics. I think these are all like starting to analyze and study the way in which we make meaning and the kind of intelligence or the behaviors that go along with, yeah, with the lived experience of reality. And there's a way in which like quite a lot of wisdom only seems to be accessible if you play the game. Like I can see people like sometimes you get these posts on Facebook where somebody will produce like an item going, oh, we've no idea what this is, this strange object. And then someone who's who knits a lot will say, oh, that's clearly a blah blah blah. And it's the kind of knowledge that you only know from actually doing that thing and
Yeah.
understanding how this small circle of stone or how this whatever it would be relates to this particular thing. So yeah, part of this for me is the willingness to like play the game a little bit, which doesn't necessarily have to be to a delusional point, but like almost
Yeah.
like some of the things seem to be about trust as well. Like if you don't trust something, then that also changes the way in which things move or behave. And I can imagine very easily a way in which like genius is partly related to the way in which we keep things out and keep allow things to come in. Like I think creativity is often about like what we know is true or what we don't know is not true or something. Like there's
Yeah.
like a fuzziness for things to manifest.
Well, when you say about that, like the sense of trust or openness, like one of the big discoveries came from practices. Like if I'm with you, it just seems like when I first meet someone, especially when I hadn't practiced much, it was like there are all kinds of automatic assumptions and ways of being that just happen, probably even before you come into the room, they're probably already happening. But as soon as you come into the room, this it's like this is who you are. This is, I watch, we watch each other and we see subtle cues, and it's like, okay, this is the. But then if you like wake up again, or you pay attention afresh, and like, okay, who who is this person? And in a way that there might be more to discover, which is kind of vulnerable because it's so good to have these frames because they give you a grip on like a sense of stable reality. But if you're like challenging your grip and letting go, like what can come in? And then what we continually discover is not only is there way more depth to everyone, they respond well, it seems, to that kind of attention, that like rather than being an assumption, being something to be discovered and something that may surprise us and open us. And it seems then a win-win because we suddenly, in experiencing more depth in someone, it always kind of, whoa, there was way more to this person than I imagined. And it's wonderful to get that kind of depth because I feel like I'm genuinely learning about the humanness, and now I actually feel close to this person in a way that I would never have from the assumptions I had before.
There do seem to be quite a lot of um, like patterns and behaviors and pressures that would lead us to not being curious and not being interested and almost like not believing that there was more complexity. Things like, yeah, if I want to make a decision, it's quite hard to make a decision if there's something which is unclear.
Mm,
So it's often, in a sense of very simple decision-making calculus, to be thinking, oh, well, if anyone here has an objection or something that might be wrong about this decision, then it's going to be harder for me to commit to it. So I'm subtly starting to want to ignore places which would be confusing or unclear because then I can make my decision, get on with my job, and then I can go home or something.
mm.
So lots of things like that can arise, which subtly just start to distort the way we both interact in terms of like choice, but both in the way we relate to others. And, start to become seeing other people as objects, or you're in my way, you're an impediment, or yeah, nothing can easily close down around that.
Yeah. Yeah, and in some environments it makes sense to do that, maybe.
I mean,
Or
there's yeah, lots of
increasingly less so
reasons.
me, but then it's amazing to be able to open those doors of
Hmm.
perception. And the thing you said before was feels resonant for me, that I like the distinction between this kind of exterior science, or the science that we know, and then there's interior science. And the interior science is still as rigorous as I mean, there is like, I don't want to talk about the cosmos too much because I know if someone's done the proper work to fully understand the complexity of the cosmos, what I'm saying is probably going to sound pretty stupid and not really like taking into account the real nuance that someone who's dedicated themselves to that. But for me, it's the same, yeah, with our practice, with meditation, with people who have explored developmental trauma, that if they've been immersed in that practice and developing their knowledge and their capacity to be non-judgmental, so they really discover what's there rather than the assumptions, and like it's a kind of, I think it's a kind of misperception. I almost said arrogance, to assume that someone in a different paradigm is kind of mistaken, or like lost in something that's irrelevant. So if you want to say something about meditation, it would be good to have actually at least had some meditation experience before you can dismiss what it what people who have done a lot of meditation are reporting about what it does. And that's this, yeah, whole dance of being cross-paradigmatic. Like you can't just know something because you know the theory about it. You usually have to practice the thing it's pointing to discover what it's pointing to.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think there's again been subtle pressures in terms of like scientific method, which have favored, not sure about integral quadrants, but I'm sure that's probably relevant here. Certain
Yeah.
places which can be like interpersonally verified, but then the intrapersonal, the stuff within has been, yeah, a little harder to, yeah, it almost doesn't get the same credence. And if we put a kind of interpersonal verification as a kind of like, this is what's worthwhile and this is valuable, then the intrapersonal, the internal, is going to be like, to some degree neglected, or yeah, this is just delusional or something. Um, and I very much stand by the power of science. Like I think it's incredible, and so much value comes from it. And I also get curious about practices like what we're doing and other meditative practices, which are exploring for the kind of, yeah, the logic, the meaning, the behaviors that seem to arise when we do attempt to study our internal experiences. And then we start to bring that into shared connection and see what arises there. Like there does seem to be wisdom there in quite a lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, we'll need to wrap up soon, but just on that, it's also there seems such a beautiful parallel because in a way, if we wanted to, you know, we could judge science by the kind of scientists that went the wrong way, like they had the hypothesis that kind of ended up being a kind of false perception and or you know they misinterpreted some kind of data or they cheated on some kind of data and that could be like labeled as science, but no, this science is it's all like the people that didn't quite get the right frame were useful because we now know that that wasn't the right frame and then the knowledge keeps developing and we have these breakthroughs and it's the same with the inner sciences for me. Like there have been so many kind of people that had false perceptions and tried experiments that massively failed in some way that was surprising when they seem to have kind of uh, yeah some kind of potential and then yeah but then there are the genuine practitioners that manage to yeah stay committed and stay as rigorous as to like yeah the truth as you can humanly can to really discover genuine like inner discoveries. Well, Ben, great to be with you, and it's an interesting conversation. I think those silences feel like they helped reveal the conversation that was wanting to be had. What was my frame.
Yeah, I often find myself attuning to that and lose my voice when I'm feeling that kind of stuff presencing. Sometimes it takes time and it requires its own time, which unfortunately doesn't always fit in with the rhythm of a podcast, but I'm sure we can sort things out in editing.
But I think I'm just gonna leave it like as it is. That's the journey. But and and also does feel like it brings together, like I did want to speak with you while I'm attempting this integration of yeah, two different paradigms and more therapeutic kind of understanding of developmental trauma and then this more meditative, presence-based inquiry. And as we kind of let go of the frame and you were sharing about, you know, how you explore your experience and the way you experience the practice in the beginning, it fits so well that other frame actually of like if you allow what's within you, if you have a sense of curiosity, if you're willing to give space to the unknown and then meet it with a kind of, yeah, genuine presence, that's it's an opportunity for some kind of transformation.
Yeah, it's like an embodied science of meaning.
Nice. We'll end on that note. Got the title for the podcast. Cool. Well, big
For
love,
sure.
man.
Hmm.
Yeah, till next time.